Christmas dinner should be about warmth and reunion. But in my family, it is a silent courtroom. We sat in the glowing candlelight of a high-end restaurant, my parents smiling that predatory smile I knew too well. They believed that before the night ended, I would sign away my entire inheritance to my sister. They had no idea that the moment they demanded my signature, they were actually sealing their own fate. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 32 years old, and in my professional life, I am a senior risk analyst for a private equity firm that manages billions in assets. My job is to look at a beautiful, promising company, strip away the glossy marketing, and find the rot hidden in the foundation. I predict disasters before they happen. It is a skill set that has served me exceptionally well in my career, but it is a curse when it comes to sitting down for dinner with my own family. We were seated at the best table in the Gilded Anchor, the premier seafood restaurant in New Harbor, Oregon. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Pacific Ocean was a churning mass of black water crashing against the rocks. But inside, the world was soft and golden. A 20-foot fir tree dominated the center of the room, decorated with crystal ornaments that caught the light of the fireplace. It was the picture of a perfect Christmas, the kind you see on greeting cards sent by people who want you to envy their lives. My parents, Robert and Eleanor, sat on one side of the table, presenting a united front of benevolence and control. My father wore a suit that cost more than most people's mortgage payments, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his smile practiced and steady. My mother was the perfect counterpart, elegant in emerald velvet, her eyes scanning the room to ensure everyone saw the Carters enjoying their holiday. They looked like the ideal parents. They looked like they loved us equally, but I knew how to read the balance sheet of their affection, and I knew exactly where the deficit lay. "This location is just divine," my mother said, signaling for the waiter with a subtle flick of her wrist. "I am so glad we could all be here, together." "It is inspiring." My sister, Lily, sighed dramatically. She sat across from me, the focal point of the table as always. At 27, Lily was still finding herself, a process that seemed to require an endless supply of family funds. She was dressed in a slip dress that was far too thin for an Oregon winter, draped in a faux fur coat that she kept slipping off her shoulder for effect. The ocean energy here is just so raw. It makes me think about my next installation. "Tell us about it, princess," my father said, leaning in, his face glowing with an interest he never showed when I talked about market volatility or asset liquidation. "Well," Lily began, her voice breathy, "it is going to be a commentary on modern consumption. I want to use discarded technology to build a forest, but sourcing the materials is so expensive. I might need a little help getting the studio space downtown." I cut into my steak, keeping my eyes on the plate. I had been here 10 minutes, and I had already been relegated to the role of the silent observer. No one had asked me about my flight. No one had asked how I was handling the acquisition deal that had kept me awake for 3 straight days. In the theater of the Carter family, I was merely a prop used to fill the 4th chair. "We can certainly discuss that," my mother said, beaming at Lily. Then, her eyes flicked toward me. The warmth dropped from her face by a fraction, replaced by a critical assessment. "Evelyn, you are so quiet. And that blazer. It is Christmas, dear, not a board meeting." I came straight from the airport. "Mother," I said, my voice steady. "The flight was delayed." "You work too hard," my father stated, not as a compliment, but as a judgment. "You need to learn to enjoy the fruits of life, not just count the seeds." I took a sip of water to wash down the bitterness. The air at the table felt heavy. Despite the festive carols playing softly in the background, there was a tension underneath the perfume and the aroma of roasted garlic, a vibrating frequency that I recognized instantly. My parents were being too nice. They were allowing Lily to ramble on without a single critique. They were filling the wine glasses a little too quickly. This was not a reunion. This was a transaction waiting to happen. I had sat through versions of this dinner a dozen times before. Usually, it ended with a request for a loan that would never be repaid, or a guilt trip about how I needed to use my connections to help a distant cousin. But this time, the silence between their sentences felt heavier. They were exchanging glances when they thought I was not looking. They were building up to something. "We have a surprise later," my mother announced, clapping her hands together lightly. "Something that will make this the best Christmas we have ever had. For everyone." I looked at her, and then at my father. He was watching me with a gaze that was predatory in its intensity. My risk analyst instincts flared to life, screaming a red alert in the back of my mind. They did not want to give me a gift. They wanted to take something. I set my fork down, my appetite gone, and waited for the other shoe to drop. The pattern of this dinner was etched into my bones long before I ever set foot in New Harbor. It was the same script we had been rehearsing since I was a child, just played out on a more expensive stage. Looking at Lily across the table, watching her theatrically push a piece of lobster around her plate, I was suddenly 12 years old again, standing in the shadow of her latest crisis. Growing up, the dichotomy between us was absolute. I was the structural integrity of the family, while Lily was the decoration. I was the straight A student, the one who filed her taxes early, the one who never missed a curfew. My achievements were treated as basic maintenance, expected and uncelebrated. When I graduated summa cum laude from university, my parents nodded as if I had simply remembered to take out the trash. It was what Evelyn did. Evelyn was fine. Evelyn did not need worry or attention because Evelyn was essentially a machine. Lily, on the other hand, was treated like a rare, volatile orchid that would wither if the temperature dropped by a single degree. Her failures were never her fault. If she failed a math class, it was because the teacher was too rigid. If she got fired from a summer job, it was because the manager was threatened by her creative spirit. I remembered the day I won a regional debate championship. I came home bursting with pride, holding the trophy, only to find the house in chaos because Lily had broken a nail and was convinced it was infected. My parents spent 3 hours soothing her, and my trophy ended up on top of the refrigerator, forgotten. For years, I fought against it. I screamed. I cried. I pointed out the unfairness. But every time I raised my voice, I was labeled the aggressor. I was told I was jealous, that I was being mean to my sensitive sister. I learned quickly that in the Carter household, the truth was not welcome if it made Lily look bad. So, I stopped speaking. My silence was not a surrender. It was a lesson taught to me by the only person who actually saw me, my grandfather. Walter Reed. Walter was a man made of granite and grit, a self-made titan who had built a logistics and real estate empire from nothing. He was not a man who gave hugs or candy. He gave advice that cut like a knife. I remember one afternoon when I was 16, sitting on his porch, fuming after my parents had canceled my birthday dinner to bail Lily out of yet another minor legal scrape. Walter had sat in his rocking chair, looking out over his land. "You are wasting your energy, Evelyn," he had said, his voice rough and deep. "You are trying to shout down a storm. You cannot scream at people to respect you." "They do not care," I had replied, fighting back tears. "It does not matter what I do." "Then stop doing," Walter said, turning his steel-gray eyes on me. "Watch. Listen. Your sister is a fire that burns everything it touches. Your parents are the ones feeding it fuel because they are afraid of the dark. But you are the foundation. You stay still. You observe. Silence is not weakness, Evelyn. Silence is a strategy. When you are quiet, people reveal themselves. They forget you are there, and they show you who they really are." That conversation changed my life. I became a student of my own family. I stopped seeking their validation and started analyzing their behaviors like data points. I noticed how my father's eyes darted when he talked about money. I noticed how my mother's affection was always transactional, and Walter took me under his wing. Instead of taking me to the park, He took me to board meetings. He showed me how to read a balance sheet, how to spot hidden liabilities, and how to structure a deal so ironclad that not even God could break it. He was preparing me. I did not realize it fully back then, but he was arming me for a war he knew was coming. He knew that one day, his legacy would be on the line, and he knew exactly who was capable of protecting it and who would squander it on a whim. They think you are just part of the furniture, Walter told me the last time I saw him alive. Let them think that. It gives you the advantage of surprise. Now, sitting in this restaurant, feeling the weight of their expectations pressing down on me, I channeled Walter. I sat perfectly still, my face a mask of calm, while my mind sharpened into a weapon. They thought they were dealing with the invisible daughter. They had no idea they were sitting across from Walter Reed's protege. When my grandfather passed away 6 months ago, he left behind more than just memories. He left behind a controlling interest in Reed Logistics and a commercial real estate portfolio worth hundreds of millions of dollars. To the outside world, it was a business empire. To my family, it was a vast, unguarded vault that they were desperate to crack open. The legal structure of the inheritance was complex, but the outcome was singular. I was the sole beneficiary of the voting shares and the primary trustee of the estate. My parents and Lily had received generous cash stipends enough to live comfortably for decades, but they had been locked out of the control room. They believed this was a temporary arrangement, a placeholder status until the grief settled, or until I came to my senses. They operated under the delusion that I was merely the custodian of the family fortune, holding it warm until they were ready to take it. I knew better. I had spent weeks with Walter's lawyers before he died. I knew every clause, every comma, and every deliberate omission in that will. There was a specific reason why my name was on the deed and not my father's, and there was a hidden mechanism embedded deep within the trust documents a failsafe that my family knew nothing about. I kept this knowledge locked away behind my teeth, observing their maneuvers with the detachment of a scientist watching bacteria in a petri dish. As the appetizers were cleared away, the conversation at the table began to pivot. The veneer of holiday cheer started to thin, revealing the steel beams of their agenda underneath. You know. Evelyn, my father started, swirling his Pinot Noir. I have been looking at the quarterly reports for Reed Logistics. The market volatility is concerning. It is a heavy burden for a young woman to carry alone, especially with your own demanding career. It is just too much pressure, sweetheart, my mother added, reaching across the table to pat my hand. Her touch was cold. We worry about you. We do not want you to burn out trying to manage Walter's complex legacy. You deserve to be free. You deserve to find a husband, travel, live a little. It was a masterful performance. They were framing their greed as parental concern. They wanted to relieve me of the burden of hundreds of millions of dollars of assets. I am managing. Dad, I said simply, keeping my voice neutral. The board is supportive. Supportive, Lily scoffed lightly, tearing a piece of bread. They are old men in suits. They do not understand the future. I was looking at that warehouse district Walter owned near the port. It is just sitting there, rotting. I have this vision of turning it into a massive, eco-conscious art commune. It could revitalize the whole city. But, of course, the initial capital required is, well, it is substantial, about $4 million to start. She looked at me expectantly, as if demanding $4 million was as casual as asking for the salt. That is zoned for industrial use, Lily, I replied. Rezoning would take years. See? My father interjected, pointing a finger at me. This is exactly what I mean. You are bogged down in the minutiae, zoning, permits, tax liabilities. It is turning you into a cynic. Evelyn, we want to help you. We want to take this weight off your shoulders so you can be my happy little girl again. I watched them. I watched the way my mother's eyes tightened when I didn't immediately agree. I watched the way Lily checked her reflection in her spoon, bored by the details but desperate for the result. They were so confident. They truly believed that because I had been the quiet one, the obedient one, I would naturally fold under the slightest pressure. They thought they were negotiating with a daughter who craved their approval. They did not realize that the daughter they were looking for had vanished years ago, replaced by the executor who sat before them. The dinner had ceased to be a meal. It was now a boardroom meeting, and they were bringing emotional arguments to a legal fight. I took a sip of my wine, savoring the vintage, and waited for them to make their move. I could see the manila envelope sitting in my father's briefcase near his feet. They were not just here to talk. They had brought paperwork. The trap was set, but they were the ones standing on the trigger. My father cleared his throat, a sharp, authoritative sound that cut through the low hum of conversation in the restaurant. It was the signal I had been waiting for, the opening gavel of the proceedings. He placed his hands flat on the white tablecloth, his wedding band catching the flicker of the candlelight. "Evelyn," he began, his tone shifting from casual to serious. "Your mother and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the future, about legacy, and about fairness." I carefully placed my knife and fork in the resting position. "Fairness," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "You have done incredibly well for yourself," he continued, offering me a tight, patronizing smile. "You have a high-paying career. You have your own condo in the city. You are secure. You are the rock of this family." He paused for effect. "Lily, however, follows a different path, a harder path. The world is not kind to dreamers, and she does not have the same defenses that you have." "What are you proposing, Dad?" I asked. I knew the answer, but I wanted to hear him say it. I wanted the audacity of it recorded in my memory forever. "We believe it is in the best interest of the family if you transfer your inheritance rights to your sister," he said. He did not blink. He did not stutter. He said it as if he were asking me to pass the salt. "Specifically, the voting shares in Reed Logistics and the commercial properties. You would keep the cash sum Walter left you, of course. But the assets? They should belong to someone who has the time and the creative vision to nurture them." I looked at my mother. She was nodding in agreement, her eyes shimmering with a manufactured tearfulness. "It is the right thing to do. Evelyn, you have always been the strong one, the provider. Think of it as your final gift to your grandfather, ensuring his favorite granddaughter is taken care of." "His favorite?" I asked, my voice devoid of inflection. "Or the one who needs the most bailing out? That is unfair," Lily snapped, dropping her wine glass a little too hard onto the table. "I am not asking for a handout, Evelyn. I am asking for resources. I have big plans. In fact, I have already spoken to the contractors for the warehouse renovation." I turned my head slowly to look at her. "You spoke to contractors?" "Yes," Lily said, lifting her chin defiantly. "And I put down the deposit for the studio equipment. They are delivering it on Tuesday morning. I told them the funds would be cleared by then. You spent $50,000 you do not have on equipment for a building you do not own." I asked. My voice was quiet, but it seemed to suck the air out of our corner of the room. "It is an investment," Lily insisted, looking to our parents for backup. "Tell her, Daddy." "She is just being proactive. Evelyn," my father said, his voice hardening. "This is exactly why we need to settle this tonight. Lily has commitments. We cannot have her defaulting because you are dragging your feet on paperwork." "So," I said, leaning back in my chair, "let me understand this clearly. You want me to sign over a multi-million-dollar portfolio, the culmination of grandfather's life work, to Lily because she has already spent money that does not belong to her. We want you to do it because you love your sister," my mother interjected, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "because family sacrifices for each other. Because you have enough. Evelyn, why do you need more? Is it greed? Is that what this is? The accusation hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. They were rewriting reality in real time, painting me as the villain for holding on to what was legally and ethically mine. I saw my father reach down toward the leather briefcase he had placed by his chair. He was done with the preamble. He was ready to close the deal. I am not greedy, Mother, I said, watching my father's hand grip the handle of the bag. I am just curious about the timing. The timing is irrelevant, my father snapped, losing his patience. The decision has been made. We are just formalizing it. The holiday music seemed to warp into something grotesque. The table felt smaller, a claustrophobic island where 3 wolves were circling 1 sheep, unaware that the sheep was actually something far more dangerous. They mistook my questions for the last gasps of resistance. They thought I was wavering. They had no idea I was just gathering evidence. My father reached down into the leather briefcase at his feet and produced a thick blue folder. He did not hand it to me. He slammed it onto the table with enough force to make the silverware jump. The heavy thud silenced our immediate vicinity, drowning out the gentle Christmas jazz playing overhead. He opened the folder, revealing a dense stack of legal documents, and smoothed them out right in the center of the table, pushing aside the centerpiece of holly and ivy. There is no need to drag this out, he said, his voice dropping the facade of holiday warmth entirely. I have had the papers drawn up. Everything is standard. It transfers full custodial control and voting rights of the Reed assets to Lily, effective immediately. I looked down at the documents. The text was dense, but the header was unmistakable. Blackwood and Associates. My grandfather had used the firm Henderson & Sons for 40 years. Henderson was a firm built on integrity and stewardship. Blackwood was a corporate shark tank my father used when he wanted to gut a company and sell it for parts. He had not consulted the estate's executors. He had gone behind their backs to draft a hostile takeover of his own daughter. You want me to sign this now? I asked, my voice level. Here in the middle of dinner. Do not be dramatic, Evelyn, my mother snapped, reaching into her designer purse. She pulled out a heavy fountain pen, my grandfather's pen. I realized with a sick jolt of recognition. She uncapped it and set it down on top of the paper, the gold nib glinting in the candlelight. We are doing this now so we can wake up tomorrow as a proper family, so we can put this ugly business of inequality behind us. Just sign the damn thing, Evelyn, Lily burst out. She was leaning so far forward her chest was practically on the table. Her eyes were wide, not with artistic passion, but with the raw, feverish hunger of an addict staring at a fix. I have people waiting on me. I cannot look like a fraud because you are being stubborn. My father saw me looking at the papers but not moving. His patience, already thin, evaporated completely. He reached out and physically shoved my dinner plate aside. The china scraped loudly against the tablecloth, a harsh, screeching sound that made the couple at the next table turn and stare. A streak of sauce smeared onto the white linen. He did not care. He pushed the contract into the empty space where my food had been, treating my sustenance as a mere obstacle to his ambition. Pick up the pen, he commanded. It was not a request. It was the voice he used on junior executives who were about to be terminated. You are going to sign this, and you are going to thank us for relieving you of a burden you are too small to carry. I looked at the pen. I looked at the smear of sauce on the tablecloth. I looked at Lily's trembling hands and my mother's cold, expectant stare. In any other version of this story, the dutiful daughter would be crying. She would be begging for their love, asking why she was not good enough to be trusted. But I just sat there. I did not pick up the pen. I did not push the papers back. I simply folded my hands in my lap and stared at my father. I held his gaze without blinking, my face a complete blank. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. A minute. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. leaving only the ragged sound of my father's breathing. "Why are you staring at me like that?" my father hissed, a flicker of uncertainty finally cracking his composure. "Evelyn, stop this childish behavior. Sign the papers." I remained silent. I let the discomfort crawl over their skin like insects. I watched Lily shift in her seat, her eyes darting between me and the pen. I watched my mother nervously touch her pearl necklace. They had rehearsed for my anger. They had rehearsed for my tears. They had absolutely no script for my indifference. Is she having a stroke?" Lily whispered, her voice shrill with panic. "She is defying us," my father growled, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. He leaned in close, his expensive cologne overpowering the smell of the pine needles. "You think you can just sit there? You think you have a choice? You are nothing without this family. Evelyn, nothing. Now sign." I unclasped my hands. I reached out, not for the pen, but for my wine glass. I took a slow, deliberate sip, my eyes never leaving his. The moment had arrived. The trap was sprung. They just did not know they were the ones inside it. As my father's face flushed a deep, ugly crimson, and his knuckles turned white gripping the table, my mind drifted away from the noise of the restaurant. I traveled back to a rainy afternoon in April, 3 weeks before my grandfather died. We were in his study, a room that smelled of cedar and old tobacco. He was frail then, his skin like parchment, but his eyes were as sharp as cut diamonds. "They will come for you, Evie," he had said, his voice a dry rattle. "Your parents, your sister. As soon as I am in the ground, they will circle like buzzards. They think the money is theirs by divine right." "I know," I had replied, holding his hand. "You cannot just say no to them." Walter had told me, leaning forward with a sudden, fierce intensity. "They will wear you down. They will use guilt. They will use intimidation. They will make your life a living hell until you sign over the keys to the kingdom. So, we are going to set a trap." He had shown me the final draft of his will that day. Specifically, Clause 14. Section B. It was a provision known in legal circles as a conditional forfeiture based on duress. My grandfather had anticipated this exact moment with terrifying precision. He knew that my father was a bully and my mother was an enabler. He knew that if they could not manipulate me, they would try to force me. The clause was simple but devastating. It stated that if any beneficiary attempted to coerce, threaten, or force the primary trustee me into altering the distribution of assets, or if I signed any transfer documents under duress, the entire estate would immediately bypass the family completely. The shares in Reed Logistics, the real estate portfolio, the liquid assets, everything would automatically transfer to a pre-selected charitable trust dedicated to marine conservation. "But you have to let them hang themselves," Walter had warned me, coughing into a handkerchief. "You cannot trigger it with a guess. You need proof. You need them to make the demand. You need them to show their teeth." That was why I had sat through the insults. That was why I had let them ignore me, belittle me, and shove a contract into my dinner. I was not paralyzed by fear. I was waiting for the legal threshold of extortion to be met. When my father shoved my plate aside, he crossed the line from persuasion to physical intimidation. When he hissed that I was nothing without the family and commanded me to sign, he provided the verbal evidence of coercion. I looked down at my phone, which was lying face down on the tablecloth near my wine glass. To them, it was just a piece of technology I had rudely left on the table. To me, it was the witness. The voice recording app had been running since we sat down. It had captured every word, the guilt-tripping, the financial entitlement, Lily's admission of spending money she did not have, and finally, my father's direct threats. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. I felt a strange sense of peace. I had done exactly what Walter asked. I had been the stone that broke the wave. They thought they were cornering a frightened daughter, but they had actually just walked into a cage and locked the door from the inside. The inheritance was no longer mine to give, and it was certainly not theirs to take. It was gone, and all I had to do now was tell them. I looked up from the wine glass, meeting my father's gaze with a terrifying calmness. I saw the confusion flickering behind his anger. He could sense that something was wrong. He expected me to crumble, to pick up the pen with shaking fingers. Instead, I looked at him with the pity one might feel for a man who has unknowingly stepped off a cliff. The trap was sprung. The steel jaws had snapped shut. It was time to show them the blood. I picked up the pen. My mother let out a breath she had been holding, and my father smirked, satisfied that his dominance was reasserted. I held the pen for a moment, feeling the weight of the gold barrel, and then I deliberately capped it with a loud, sharp click. I dropped the pen onto the table. It rolled across the documents and fell onto the floor. "No," I said. The word was small, but it hit the table like a grenade. "Excuse me," my father asked, his voice dangerously low. "I said no," I repeated, standing up and smoothing out my skirt. "I will not sign these papers. Not tonight. Not ever." "You listen to me, you little—" My father started, half rising from his chair, his face twisting into a snarl. "You do not walk away from this. If you walk out that door without signing, you are dead to this family. You hear me? Cut off. We will sue you for mismanagement. We will drag you through every court in this state until you are bankrupt. Think about what you are doing. Evelyn!" My mother cried out, her voice rising to a shrill pitch that turned heads across the restaurant. "Think about your sister. She needs this." "I need that money," Lily shrieked, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "I already promised the studio they will sue me. I cannot go back to them empty-handed. You are ruining my life." "That is not my problem, Lily," I said, picking up my purse. "You selfish bitch!" Lily spat, grabbing my arm, her nails dug into my skin. "You have everything. You have a job. You have money. Why do you have to take this from me?" I pulled my arm away from her grasp with a force that made her stumble back into her chair. My father was practically purple, sputtering with rage. "I am warning you, Evelyn, this is your last chance. You sign that paper right now, or you will regret it for the rest of your miserable life." I looked at them, really looked at them. The masks were gone. There was no love here, no family warmth, not even a shred of respect, just greed and the panic of parasites realizing their host was detaching itself. Lily's eyes were darting around, a flicker of genuine terror starting to replace her anger as she realized I was actually leaving. But my parents, they were still arrogant. They still thought they held the cards. "You should have listened to grandfather," I said softly. "What is that supposed to mean?" My father snapped. "It means," I said, leaning in so only they could hear me, "that you just made a choice that you can never undo." "Stop speaking in riddles," my mother demanded, slamming her hand on the table. "I am not," I replied. "Check your email in the morning." "My lawyer will be in touch." I turned to walk away. "Evelyn," my father roared, causing a waiter to drop a tray of silverware nearby. "Get back here. I am not finished with you." I did not stop. I did not slow down. I walked past the 20-foot Christmas tree, past the happy families toasting with champagne, and past the hostess stand where the staff looked on in wide-eyed silence. The heavy oak door of the restaurant swung open, and the cold, salty air of the Oregon coast hit my face. It felt cleaner than the air inside. Behind me, I could feel their eyes burning into my back. They were furious. Yes, but they were not terrified yet. They thought this was just a tantrum. They thought I was playing hard to get. They believed that tomorrow, or the next day, they would bully me back into submission. They thought the money was still there, waiting to be claimed. They did not know that the email they would receive at 9 o'clock the next morning would not be a negotiation. It would be a notification of forfeiture. I walked to my rental car, the sound of the ocean crashing against the cliffs filling my ears. I did not look back at the warm glow of the restaurant windows. I got into the car, locked the doors, and for the first time in years, I took a deep breath that went all the way to the bottom of my lungs. 48 hours after the dinner at the Gilded Anchor, we gathered in the conference room of Henderson and Sons. The room was a fortress of mahogany and leather, situated on the 42nd floor of a skyscraper in downtown Portland. The view was expansive, looking out over the gray city, but inside, the air was sterile and cold. My parents and Lily arrived 10 minutes late, sweeping in with an air of annoyed victory. They looked refreshed, likely assuming that my presence here meant capitulation. In their minds, my storming out of the restaurant was merely a dramatic pause in a negotiation they had already won. My father adjusted his silk tie, refusing to make eye contact with me, while Lily aggressively typed on her phone, likely coordinating the delivery of the equipment she could not afford. Arthur Henderson sat at the head of the table. He was a man of 70, with skin like crumpled paper and eyes that had seen every variety of human greed. He did not smile when my family entered. He simply gestured to the empty chairs. "Let us get this over with," my father said, tossing his coat onto a spare chair. "We have wasted enough time. Where do we sign, Mr. Henderson placed his hands on the table. "There will be no signing today, Robert." "Excuse me," my mother asked, freezing halfway into her seat. "We are here to transfer the voting shares. Evelyn has agreed." "Evelyn has not agreed," Mr. Henderson corrected, his voice dry and devoid of warmth. "And even if she wished to, she no longer has the authority to do so." "What are you talking about?" Lily asked, looking up from her phone. "She is the trustee. She has the authority." "Not anymore," Mr. Henderson said. He tapped a key on his laptop. Suddenly, a voice filled the room. It was tinny, recorded on a mobile device, but the clarity was undeniable. It was my father's voice, loud and angry, booming from the speakers embedded in the conference table. "You do not walk away from this. If you walk out that door without signing, you are dead to this family. You hear me? Cut off. We will sue you." My father went pale. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Lily just stared at the speaker, her mouth slightly open. Mr. Henderson stopped the recording. That audio was time-stamped at 8:45 in the evening on Christmas Eve. It documents a clear, unequivocal attempt to coerce the primary trustee into altering the distribution of the estate assets under threat of financial and emotional retribution. "You recorded us!" my father hissed, turning to glare at me. "That is illegal." Oregon is a one-party consent state. Mr. Henderson interjected smoothly, his tone slicing through my father's anger like a scalpel. "And frankly, the legality of the recording is secondary to the legality of your actions. You have triggered Clause 14, Section B of Walter Reed's last will and testament." He opened a file in front of him and began to read. "In the event that any beneficiary attempts to force, coerce, or threaten the trustee regarding the disposition of assets, the trust is immediately dissolved in regards to said beneficiaries. The assets are effectively frozen and automatically redirected." "Redirected," my mother whispered. "Redirected where?" "To the secondary beneficiary designated by Mr. Reed," Mr. Henderson stated, closing the file. "The Walter Reed Scholarship Fund for Underprivileged Engineers and the Pacific Marine Conservancy. As of 9 o'clock this morning, the transfer is complete. The logistics company, the real estate portfolio, and the liquid capital approximately $450 million in assets have been moved into the nonprofit trust." "No," Lily said, shaking her head. "No, that is not—" "I have the equipment coming. I put down the deposit. I need that money." "You have no money," Mr. Henderson said. looking at her over his spectacles. The monthly stipends you have been receiving were contingent on the trust's solvency. Since the trust has been dissolved and the assets moved to a charitable foundation, those stipends have ceased, effective immediately. "You cannot do this," my father shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "This is entrapment. We will contest this." "You can try," Mr. Henderson replied, unimpressed. But Walter was very thorough. He anticipated this exact scenario. He paid me a retainer specifically to defend this clause against you. "Every dime you spend on legal fees will be wasted, and since you no longer have an income source, I would advise against expensive litigation." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a vacuum sealing. The air left the room, sucking out their arrogance, their plans, and their future. Lily dropped her phone. It clattered loudly on the polished wood, the screen cracking. My father slumped back in his chair, looking suddenly very old and very small. My mother just stared at the wall, her eyes glassy, unable to process the magnitude of the loss. They had walked in believing they owned the world. They were walking out with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the bills they could no longer pay. The blade had fallen, and it had been a clean cut. My mother was the first to break. The icy mask of the matriarch melted into a puddle of desperate, ugly panic. She reached across the polished table, her fingers trembling as she tried to grab my hand, but I pulled it back. "Evelyn, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "You have to fix this. Talk to Mr. Henderson. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. We were emotional. It was Christmas. You cannot let them take everything. It is not a misunderstanding. Mother," I said, my voice steady. "It is a contract. You understand contracts, do you not? You were very eager for me to sign one just 2 days ago." "You did this on purpose," Lily screamed, jumping up from her chair. She looked like a cornered animal, her face blotchy and wild. "You set us up. You knew this would happen. You wanted to steal my future because you are jealous. You are just a bitter, lonely workaholic who hates that I am special. Sit down, Lily," I said. I did not shout. I did not raise my voice. I simply spoke with an authority that sucked the energy right out of her tantrum. She froze, stunned by the command, and slowly sank back into the leather chair. My father looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Evelyn, be reasonable. We are your family. Does that mean nothing to you? We raised you. We put a roof over your head. You cannot destroy us over a momentary lapse in judgment." "A momentary lapse?" I asked. "Is that what you call 32 years of neglect? Is that what you call treating me like an employee in my own home while you worshipped the ground Lily walked on?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gray skyline. I felt lighter than I had in decades. For years, I waited. I told them, turning back to face the 3 people who had defined my world. I waited for you to ask me how my day was. I waited for you to come to a single awards ceremony. I waited for you to look at me and see a daughter, not a safety net. But you never did. You only looked at me when you needed something fixed or paid for. We loved you." My mother sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "No," I corrected her gently. "You loved that I was convenient. You loved that I was quiet. And you loved that I never asked for anything. But the moment I became an obstacle to what you wanted for Lily, you turned on me. You threatened me. You tried to bully me into submission. We were desperate," my father argued weakly. "And now you are poor," I said. "There is a difference." I looked at Lily, who was staring at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "You said I took this from you, Lily, but I did not take anything. Grandfather gave me a choice. He gave me the power to protect this family or to let it face the consequences of its own greed. All you had to do was treat me with basic human decency for one dinner. Just one dinner. If you had just asked me about my life, or if you had not tried to force my hand, the money would still be there. You would still have your stipend. You would still be safe. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the back of the empty chair. I did not pull the trigger. You did. You walked into that restaurant with a loaded gun, pointed it at me, and pulled the trigger. You just did not realize the gun was pointed backward. The room fell into a silence so profound it felt heavy. There were no more arguments, no more threats. The reality of their situation was settling in like concrete. They were looking at me, really looking at me, for the first time in my life. But it was too late. I was no longer the daughter seeking approval. I was the stranger who had just signed their eviction notice from the life they thought they deserved. I am leaving now, I said, picking up my coat. Mr. Henderson will handle the transition. I suggest you start looking for jobs. I hear the market is quite competitive these days. I walked to the door, the click of my heels the only sound in the room. They did not say a word. They just sat there, frozen in the wreckage of their own making. The silence, which had been my prison for so long, was now their cell. Stepping out of the Henderson and Sons building, the wind off the Willamette River bit into my cheeks. But for the first time in my life, the cold felt invigorating rather than bitter. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching the busy people of Portland rushing past, heads down against the chill. They were all going somewhere, carrying their own burdens, their own secrets. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sharp, gray air. I felt lighter. It was a physical sensation, as if a vest lined with lead weights had finally been unbuckled and allowed to drop to the pavement. I took my phone out of my pocket. There were already 12 missed calls from my mother and a string of incoherent, text-messaged paragraphs from Lily. I did not read them. I did not feel the familiar spike of anxiety or the urge to fix things. Instead, I opened my settings, scrolled down to their contact names, and one by one, I blocked them. I blocked my father. I blocked my mother. I blocked Lily. With 3 simple taps of a screen, I severed the digital umbilical cord that had been strangling me for 32 years. There would be no Christmas miracle for the Carter family. There would be no tearful reconciliation over eggnog. No hugging it out by the fireplace while soft music played. Those endings belong to movies. In the real world, actions have consequences that echo for decades. My parents were facing a retirement with 0 assets and a lifestyle they could no longer sustain. They would have to sell the house in New Harbor. They would have to learn what it meant to budget, to scrimp, to worry. Lily would have to find a job that did not involve spending someone else's fortune on vague artistic endeavors. She would have to learn the value of $1 the hard way, starting from scratch at 27. It was harsh, yes, but it was also the first honest thing that had happened to them in years. As for the inheritance, it was gone, just as Walter had intended. The millions that had caused so much rot in my family were now safe in the accounts of the Scholarship Fund and the Marine Conservancy. The money would build schools. It would protect the ocean. It would fund the dreams of young engineers who had the grit my sister lacked. I would not see a penny of it, and that was perfectly fine with me. I had my career. I had my own money. I had my integrity. I thought about my grandfather then. I realized that the trap he set was not really about punishment. It was about liberation. He knew that as long as the money was dangling there, my family would never let me go, and they would never learn to stand on their own feet. By removing the prize, he had broken the game. He had forced us all to face who we really were without the cushioning of his wealth. I walked down the street to a small coffee shop on the corner. I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window. I watched the rain start to fall, washing the city clean. I was alone. I had no family dinner to attend, no obligations to fulfill, no one to please. The silence in my mind was not empty. It was full of possibility. I took a sip of the hot coffee. It was bitter and strong, just how I liked it. For the first time, The future was not a terrifying list of demands I had to meet. It was a blank page. And as I sat there, watching the rain blur the lights of the city, I realized that this was the real inheritance Walter had left me. He had not given me a fortune. He had given me my life back. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you. Please comment below and let me know where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts on how I handled my family. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Mira Revenge Stories, hit the like button, and press the hype button to help this story reach more people. Your support means the world to me.